everyone. Welcome to the 5th Ora Torah Lichner class. We're facing this way instead of the normal direction because tonight is our first movie night. You have 15 minutes of discussion, of a presentation, of an introduction to the movie before it starts. So I'll just give you an outline for tonight's event. So let me present to you Dr. Giacomo Lichner. He's a history lecturer at Victoria University. He'll be talking for about 15 minutes. Then we'll have the movie in its entirety. There will be no pauses, but if you need to stand up, feel free to stand up and either reorder or do your business, but we will not have any pauses. The film is 2 hours long. It'll finish at 8:45, and we will have another 15 minutes of discussion. So on your tables you have the handouts. Giacomo will be taking you through that at the beginning and at the end of the movie. Thank you very much for coming. And one more thing, I'll be passing around the gold Koha box, just so that we can help. Just so that we can help reimburse our friend Warren in the kitchen for all the kosher pots and pans he's had to buy. And so thank you very much. Any little donation is appreciated.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming. Wonderful to see so many of you and some very familiar faces that I haven't seen in a little while. I actually want to start by drawing your attention to this, which is quite a horrid little envelope, but also, yeah, it's the machine I am picking up. It's the cappuccino. How ironic that in Italian should be drowned out by a cappuccino machine. I'll try my best, right? So this is a horrid little envelope that I received together with quite a few colleagues of mine at Victoria and many colleagues in other parts of the world, which is perhaps not the most cheerful way to start the evening, but I think an interesting way to start the evening and also maybe motivate ourselves to keep going, and a way to thank Michelle for organizing these evenings. This is a correspondence from what is clearly a Holocaust denier, a Mr. William Kumberger, who lives in Pennsylvania, Levittown, Pennsylvania, and who's been sending around emails with letters to anyone on his list. I don't know how you make his list. It's not an honor that I am very proud of. Sending out documents which are original documents, and this is an interesting thing to think about in terms of Holocaust denial, that it's often based on documents that are existent and that are original, where the interpretation, particularly the interpretation of tiny details, is effectively raped. It's reversed. It's turned on its back to serve the purposes of the denialist. I would like to shred these, but I think it's better as an historian not to shred documents, and it's best to keep them. And I think there may be some in the room who want to have a look at it. The original documents are in German, and those of you who speak German might be interested in having a look at the techniques that these people employ. And I think that should strengthen our resolve, that and very tragic events of the recent weeks in France, for example, and perhaps slightly less tragic but not less horrible events that happen regularly all over the world, should strengthen our resolve to keep going, to keep remembering, to keep talking. And when I say remembering, I mean remembering critically, not remembering acritically just for the sake of it, in the way that perhaps this film might encourage you to do, but we'll talk about that later. So I said facts, and I said how those documents are original, and that leads me to my first point, which is really a methodological point. I want to explain where I stand as an historian who uses film as his resources for some of his work, for much of my work. The historian is interested in the facts and their interpretation, and both sides of it, establishing the facts and interpreting the facts, are equally important to the historian's discipline. So where does film come into it? There's a long debate amongst historians since the late 80s, since the early 80s, really, about the role that film might play in the communication of history to large crowds, larger than any great history book might be able to reach. Stephen was very kind in discussing my book just a moment ago, my book from 2008, which was well received and has sold 321 copies, and the publisher is very pleased with it, which is gives you really an understanding of the kind of numbers in which academic publishing moves. So of course we're interested in film for that reason. But at the same time, historians debating film, and you see this in the popular media all the time, and every time an historical film comes out, are really fact checkers. Historians seldom are able to go beyond what's on the screen, beyond what's physically on the screen, to describe whether it is realistic or not. And what some historians have been trying to do is argue that fact-checking, that approach to accuracy, is in a way a waste of time, and that what we should do is really realize that film is a different medium to academic history, to historiography, and that it has a different language, different visuals, different symbols, but through these different languages, it has the ability to approach accuracy. This is not to say that this particular film is necessarily accurate. This is to say that when today I refer to the text in the film and accuracies or inaccuracies therein, what I'm doing is not necessarily engaging with them on the surface for whether they look real or not. They're obviously reconstructions. It's a film after all. But what I'm doing is arguing. Is suggesting that whether a detail is accurate or inaccurate, it is that way for a reason, and that both accuracies and inaccuracies work towards an overall message that the film is trying to put across, an overall argument about history that the film is trying to make. So what we should be concerned with in regards to accuracy is the accuracy of the final message, not the accuracy of the elements that compose it, or not necessarily those accuracy. So to me, as an historian studying cinema and studying what other historians have called historiography, so the making of history through the visual image, through the moving image, what I'm saying is that both inaccuracies and accuracies interest me in the same way. And both of them have things to say to us about where the filmmaker is coming from, which time and which country he's living in or making his film in, and both inaccuracies and accuracy inform that final argument that we need to assess. So, the film that we're showing you today is The Truce by Primo Levi, a book that he wrote in 1958. So 11 years after his better known memoir, If This Is a Man. The Truce tells the story of Levi's journey home from Auschwitz. So it picks up where If This Is a Man left off, with the opening of the gates of Auschwitz by the Red Army on the 27th of January, 1945. And it follows Levi and the many characters that he meets in this unique period in European history, where hundreds of thousands, millions of displaced people are moving through Europe, trying to make their way home, one way or another, east or west. And these guys that you see are trying to make their way home to Italy from eastern Poland. And so the Truce, the novel the memoir that Levi wrote, is in part a sort of road trip, but in part, much more significantly, a symbol for a different kind of journey that Levi is undertaking, a journey that is inherent in the very title of his first memoir, If This Is a Man, a journey back into what he calls the human congress, after what he can only describe as an experience that makes him feel as no longer a human, the experience of the concentration camp. So the story is a physical journey, but also a psychological journey. And I think it's very important at this stage to mention that Levi's journey ends positively. You know that because he went on to write the book. So he gets home, And he gets home and he finds that his home is still standing. It's a much better situation than many, perhaps most of the people in his situation. His family everyone in his family is alive. His house in Turin is still standing, and it still belongs to the Levi family. So he's in good shape in relation to Europe's Jews. And yet that journey is not entitled the peace, it's entitled the truce. Because when he arrives in Turin, he is able to find a warm home, he's able to tell his story, again more than many can say, and in a sense he is able to sort of return to normality, but that normality is not a peace, it is at best a truce. And the ending of the book explains that very well. He explains how he got there, and he gives incredibly, painfully little time and space to that moment of finding his family again. It doesn't matter so much to him. He's much more interested in the journey than in the getting there. And then he talks about a dream that he gets, and that's the ending of the book. It's his dream, and it goes like this. It is a dream within a dream, varied in detail, one in substance. I am sitting at a table with my family or with friends, or at work or in the green countryside. In short, in a peaceful, relaxed environment, apparently without tension or affliction. Yet I feel a deep and subtle anguish, the definite sensation of an impending threat. And in fact, as the dream proceeds, slowly or brutally, each time in a different way, everything collapses and disintegrates around me. The scenery, the walls, the people, while the anguish becomes more intense and more precise. While the anguish becomes more intense and more precise. Now everything has changed to chaos. I am alone in the center of a grey and turbid nothing. And now, I know what this thing means. And I also know that I have always known it. I am in the lager once more. And nothing is true outside the lager. All the rest was a brief pause, a deception of the senses, a dream. My family, nature in flower, my home. Now this inner dream, the dream of peace, is over, and the outer dream which continues, gelid, a well-known voice resounds. A single word, not imperious, but brief and subdued. It is the dawn command of Auschwitz, a foreign word, feared and expected. Get up. Savak. I can't pronounce the Polish, so I apologize for that. So the film, the book, like almost all Holocaust memoirs, does not end in hope, but it ends in a sort of, in a sort of equilibrium of essence, where the person who's a survivor is forever a survivor. It never moves on from that. And Levi's life attests to that, and without going into whether he committed suicide or not, his life attests to the fact that he was a survivor. That's what he was, in a sense, for the rest of his life. Now, how does the film approach this? I will summarize very, very quickly my point of view on the film, and then we'll play it, and then we'll have a chance. And as somebody who works on film, I've never got over the fact that I don't like telling people what to think about the film. So I'll tell you what I think about it, and then you'll tell me whether you agree. Now, my thesis is that this film, to put it in a word, operates a process of Christianization of Primo Levi. And it does so in a variety of ways, and I will suggest a couple of reasons. It does so right from the beginning by making him stand out as an individual amongst his class, I might want to call it, amongst his group. One thing that stands out in Levi's work, which is perhaps the reason that it is so has enjoyed such longevity, is that it is a truly collective work. I mean, he's truly grasped and been able to convey the collective aspect of the Shoah, of the attempted genocide of Europe's Jewry. So to make him stand out is obviously a Hollywood convention, a film cinematic convention, but it's one that completely guts the essence of Levi's work. From that, the film continues to remodel the layers that make up Levi's identity. Now, Levi was a secular Jew. He's on record as having said that he had never really thought much about his Jewishness until he was forced to by the racial laws. the Italian racial laws of 1938. But he was both a Jew, but also an Italian. He was a liberal left-wing man, a socialist. There was a partisan between late 43 and the spring of 44. He was a chemist, and that's central to who he was, and anyone who's read him knows that. He was also a Holocaust survivor. There are layers, like everybody, like in everybody's case, that form his identity. But when you're constructing a representation of that, whether it's a biographical one or a biopic, you are remodeling, you're constructing those layers, and the emphasis that you put on one layer or another changes the person that you're representing. So in my view, Rossi, in remodeling Levi, specifically highlights the parts of him that are Italian and left-wing, and plays down his Jewishness, in fact. And this construction or reconstruction of Levi culminates in the character taking on the characteristics of somebody who forgives and who brings to other people the ability to forgive and brings the enemy to the ability to act in asking for forgiveness. And this is this is something that is completely opposite to where Levi stood in this, and it's been very clear in several of his books. And later, after the film, I'll give you a read of a short paragraph from the Truce to suggest a very significant difference from the film. So why does he do it? Now, one thing I'm not suggesting is that Rossi is in any way doing acting on proselytism. He's not a radical Catholic trying to convert Jews to Catholicism. Rossi is a now quite elderly filmmaker who's been active since the 60s. He was, I suppose he still is, a communist probably. He's known for his political film. So there is no religious undertone here, and there's certainly no racist or denialist undertone, otherwise he wouldn't be making a film like this. What Rossi is doing is really he's bringing the perspective of a left-wing Italian intellectual to Levi. And while that perspective is legitimate, the result is that he changes who Levi really was, and that, in my view, is more than a shame. It's something that the film gets, it's a sort of central inaccuracy of the film. I think we'll play it at this stage if Michelle will help me get into the computer, which is over there. Thanks, Michelle. And then we'll have a chance to discuss exactly how the film does the things that I suggested it does after the film. You all right? By all means, I want you to sort of, deal with your own emotional response to it, and also to how it interacted with your ideas about the subject, your taste about film and so on. But, so while you gather your thoughts, thanks, David. I'll just draw your attention to 4 scenes that I think are key, particularly to the issue of Jewish identity in this film and identity and Levi's identity in general. Notwithstanding the fact that identity is not, by any means, the only issue that we could discuss here. The first scene is the last scene that you've seen, and I would ask you to look on the reverse of your outline, where you have the full poem, the full version of Primo Levi's poem. Now that poem, when you read "If This Is a Man," is entitled "If This Is the Man," and it's the epigraph to the book. But when Levi penned the poem, it was called Shema, and if you read the poem, you'll see he basically follows the structure of the Shema, and he replaces the precept, the command to listen, the monotheistic, the statement of monotheistic faith of the Jews, with the command to remember, to consider and remember the Shoah. That poem is made up of 2 parts, one that tells you to remember and to consider, and one that tells you that if you don't do it, may your house fall apart, may illness impede you, may your children turn their faces from you. The significance of removing that final curse is, I would argue, quite a lot, quite significant. The second, and you'll tell me what you think in a minute, the second scene that I would draw your attention to is the one in Munich, where the German soldier kneels. The train did indeed pass through Munich, much to the chagrin of the passengers who felt that once they were in Austria borders with Italy, why can't we just go straight to Italy? But no, for the reasons of post-war Europe's transport, they had to go through Munich. But no German knelt during that visit. Instead, Primo Levi went for a wander outside the station, and this is what he writes. I found myself searching among them, among that anonymous crowd of sealed faces, for other faces, clearly stamped in my memory, many bearing a name, the name of someone who could not but know, remember, reply, who had commanded and obeyed, killed, humiliated, corrupted, a vain and foolish search, because not they but others, the few just ones, would reply for them. And he goes on, no one looked us in the eyes, no one accepted the challenge. They were deaf, blind and dumb, imprisoned in their ruins as in a fortress of willful ignorance, still strong, still capable of hatred and contempt, still prisoners of their all tangled of pride and guilt. Consider these two scenes, these two choices together. They are scenes, but I ask you to think about them as choices, because of what I said at the beginning of my introduction about inaccuracy and accuracy. Don't think about them in absolute terms, accuracy, inaccuracy. Think about them as choices that the filmmakers make to put their point across. That will lead you to what the point is, and then it will lead us to assess whether that point is accurate or not. The third scene that I would ask you to consider is the scene where Flora, the Jewish woman, Italian Jewish woman, who had become a prostitute in Auschwitz, is in the line to receive meat, and Daniele refuses it and chastises her, and Primo defends her. That scene never happens in the book. Instead, Primo meets Flora, they look at each other in the eyes, there's a moment where they recognize each other, but neither of them says anything, because it's too awkward. And Levi remembers how Flora was indeed a prostitute in Auschwitz, and with the extra bread how she shared the extra bread that she obtained that way. She gave it to the men, to her fellow Italian Jews in the camp, and how they knew where it came from, but it was too awkward to discuss it. And when they meet after the war, there's no word spoken between them. So that entire scene is fabricated, and it's a choice. The final scene I want to draw your attention to before I open to the floor is the scene where Primo and Cesare, the Roman Jew, the sort of more comedic character, who's actually quite true to the story, meets the Austrian woman who tells them, no, you're not Italians. Italians have got flowing locks and passionate eyes. You're Croats. That scene happens almost exactly the same in the book. But what also happens in the book, almost straight afterwards, and that is not in the film, is another scene at a train station, in a train station at night, in which Levi and Cesare, the same two, hear two Jewish girls speaking Yiddish to each other, and they, as good Italian passionate male, try it on. They decide to try and, see what happens. So they send Primo over to speak to them, and he tries to explain they too are Jews, and the two Polish girls say, but you don't speak Yiddish, you're not Jews. And it's described beautifully. It says in their language that makes perfect sense. That was perfectly rational. They had no idea, no knowledge of the fact that there may be Jews around the world who weren't Eastern European Jews who spoke Yiddish. And in that nighttime conversation with these two girls, Levi is able to explain to them that there are such Jews and that he was a Jew. But that scene didn't make the cut. So why, in a sense, both the accuracy of having the scene with the Austrian woman, which really did happen, and the inaccuracy of not having that scene in the train station, both accuracy and inaccuracy work towards the same argument, which is that, that Levi needs to have an identity that is universally recognized, that is not specifically Jewish. I think with this, I sort of explain where I'm coming from in regard to this film, or at least with Jewish identity and this film. I would like to open the floor and see what you think and take your questions if you have them. Yeah.
Personally, I feel that the Jewish identity comes through very strong. So unless you're telling me to see black when I see white, that's my feeling. You also commented something before the film about the effect of singling him out. But this is his story from his point of view. So I don't see how you can represent his book in film without singling him out. And I think also you need a hero. So we need to follow him to identify and to feel. This is an argument.
No, fair enough. But yes, is it to the same point? Yeah.
I was brought up in a two-religion household, so I see both sides. And Rossi has obviously had a Catholic upbringing, or Catholic.
Well,
the
as I said, he's a communist, so
because
probably.
all those things you have mentioned are all Christian versions of. He's taken the book and he's made a Catholic scene out of it. Let me explain. You have the four horsemen at the beginning, which is the apocalypse. You have the woman being defended by Levi, saying, no, you are just as guilty. Another scene from the Catholic Gospels. And Mary Magdalene, the same story. And then the German soldier kneeling, asking for forgiveness. I think Weissel brought it up in Sunflower, that to some Christians, to be forgiven, you have to show remorse. So the filmmaker was showing this German soldier kneeling, trying to ask for forgiveness and remorse. And for me, it's interesting sitting, different people, but I thought it was heavily overladen with the filmmaker's obvious Catholic or Christian upbringing into it.
Yeah, please.
I haven't read the book, so it's a bit difficult to compare a movie to a book that you haven't read. So I have to go by what you have said. And it sounds to me as if Rossi is trying to say, okay, the Holocaust happened, let's move on. The Germans are apologizing. Everybody's offering you cake and drink, even though you don't sound like Italian or whatever. Let's move on. Whereas from what you're saying, Primo Levi does not want to go on. He thinks that he's forever, in quoting you, a survivor. So that is, I don't know if that's what you mean by the little things that are inaccurate lead up to a conclusion that is demonstrably inaccurate.
No, I mean, he does move on in a sense. He has a family, he's married and has children, and he does his writing and he becomes a chemist. But
the dream
eventually, and he continues to think about these things for a long time. With regard to the first point, I would say it's interesting that you say we need a hero, because actually we don't. I mean, it's a cinematic convention, but we don't actually need it. We don't actually need a hero. And although it's true, it is his point of view. His point of view is to not talk about himself. His point of view.
The book is written. I haven't read the book.
Yeah, I mean I would suggest the book is written. His point of view is used to observe other people, and in a sense, that's what everyone's point of view is not about ourselves. It's about what we see. So that's what the book, but also every other book. If This Is a Man, The Drowned and the Saved, what he really grasps, I suggested earlier, I think what makes his books great is this collective nature. Now, obviously, film cannot be about 6 million individuals, so we have to synthesize. Nevertheless, I think it's that you can do it in different ways. Now, to make Primo Levi stand out when the Russians arrive, when the ending of If This Is a Man says very clearly, they arrive as he is burying somebody, and that's represented at the very beginning of the film. and he's just sorry because he doesn't have a hat, so he can't take it off, and the people he's burying the corpses with that can. In his writing, he's part of a whole. And in the film, you have to make him stand out, but it's not because it's his perspective. It's because you have to establish straight away that he already knows. His knowledge is superior, and if you then look at him as he develops throughout the film, he's a character who's never banal, never tried, has no joy in the little things. He stops and ponders about music and books. In the market, he's looking at books when others are looking at food. He's an intellectual and, in my view, a kind of messiah whose job is not religious but cultural, of bearing testimony.
But isn't my interest exactly a huge part of my interest in seeing this movie is getting to know Primo Levi a little bit somehow.
Yeah.
And that's what is achieved by singling him out, by us seeing him and what he's going through and thinking, and like you say, where his mind is at, rather than a documentary that watches everyone.
Yeah, but what I'm suggesting is that you don't get to know Primo Levi, you get to know Rosie's Levi, who is quite different, in my opinion, to Levi, and as you can glean from his writing.
Yeah.
When was it made?
It was made in '97, so it came out 10 years after Levi died. And it was a big deal with a big opening when Levi's widow went, and there was some controversy, but it was pretty mooted. Because the subject is such that nobody wants to say, hang on, you got it wrong, because at the end of the day there's an interesting, important message about bearing witness. But my point is, when you add closure to a story about the Holocaust, right, okay, the camps are open. In a sense, the Holocaust ends there, but in another sense it doesn't. And when you add closure and hope to it, you're performing a task for the audience. Fair enough. We're sending you away happier. But what does that mean for the memory that you're preaching? I mean, what are we remembering? And if you finish a film with with Levi's poem that tells you to remember, but you take away the bit that says, well, if you forget to remember, this is, you better take this bloody seriously. Excuse me. If you take that away, then what are you actually asking people to remember? You had a question.
Giacomo, sorry, I'll take it to a different...
No, it's fine.
When we all know when the Red Army liberated Auschwitz, and when the British and the Americans liberated Bergen-Belsen, we know that the inmates were actually walking skeletons, physically. Here you didn't really get that idea. Now, this is the inaccuracy that you were talking, and I thought Rossi was trying to portray that the physical scar wasn't the main thing, but the spirit.
Yeah.
And when he comes back to home and everything is normal, basically, and he sits with himself with that pane and leche, I don't know how to call it, with the
bread and milk.
And you see that he thinks about his soul, actually, that is really hurt, not really. And then he just throws the bread. I mean, he ate a little bit, but then. I don't know.
Thanks. No, that's great.
I don't know. My kind of thinking. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I would say two things to that. One is, that's the reason why I think, historians sometimes approach film in a way that is too literal. Because obviously, like, we know that that's not what the liberation of Auschwitz looked like. But at the same time, we know that you can't reproduce that. And Elie Wiesel says very well in his introduction to Anna Tinsel's book, which is in your further reading list, that to actually get an actor and make him or her look like a walking skeleton would be obscene. It would be almost pornographic. It would be disrespectful rather than accurate. So that's partly why I'm saying I think historians are too superficial. You need to consider that sometimes inaccuracy is needed in film as a medium to make an accurate point. On the other hand, the final point, I'm not sure how accurate it is, and it's interesting that you mentioned the scars. That's indeed what the book is about. There's two things about that final scene that are not right. One is the ending of the poem that disappears. The other one is the shirt, which Levi doesn't keep because he wants food, and so at the first opportunity he sells it to buy food. But again, you cannot retain the image of Levi as somebody who is abstract from humanity because he's superior to humanity. He's Christ-like. He's the Messiah. He needs to remember he would never sell that precious thing in the film, but of course, in reality, he does. So, in a way, he's using that to tell us that Levi's psychological scars, and the long process of healing. But on the other hand, in doing so, he's denying that Levi becomes human again, and somebody who wants to eat is human. So, there are several things going on there. And again, in regards to psychological scars, that's one of the things that I think for a while the film actually gets right in a sense, and does quite well, is this giving you the sense that healing those scars is a very long and long process. Now, film doesn't do patience very well, no? So as a medium, it needs to give you a nice line. Here you are not human, here you're human. But this film tries, there are moments when he hears music, when he has a moment to consider that he's free. There's that lovely look they give each other right at the beginning when Daniele offers him bread, and there he goes, hang on, are you actually giving away your food? Which tells you that transition, from inmate to free person. On the other hand, the one thing that really disappoints me is that there still needs to be a line to tell the audience, right, he's human again. And that line in this film is sex, and the relationship he has with Flora in the woods, which is completely fabricated. As I said, Flora and he see each other, they look at each other, they don't speak to each other, and they're off each on their own path. So it's, I think it's disappointing that the filmmakers couldn't come up with something more imaginative to tell us, right, he's reintroduced in the human congress, as Levi puts it. Yes.
Yes. I've been in Auschwitz, and I was amazed that people were all dressed. And they had wraps and skirts, but they didn't have anything. I don't understand how people can imagine that people in Auschwitz have been dressed like human beings. Not only that hair was cut everywhere where a human being grows hair, but we had nothing. When the war was over, I had one single frock, whatever you call it, which I have given to the Truce. And you can see that. That was all. There was absolutely nothing else, so that was one thing. Now the other thing was that the doors were open and people started to eat. It took me 2 months to be able to eat something proper.
Yes, I felt that was glossed over quite a lot.
Yes.
The first experience of life after the camp was just sort of almost a little bit insulting.
Well, I
Do you think
don't
they were
know
trying to
about,
assage their own
no,
guilt?
no, I don't think so
No,
at
no,
all.
no,
I
the
think-
Italian, the
yeah.
Russians, and they were trying to say, they deny what you actually look like, the scars sort of thing.
Yeah.
And do you think they were trying to assage their own guilt, that they looked well fed and they had clothing and things? Do you think the filmmakers were,
No,
that kind of
I
that
don't
mindset
think- I
that they were
don't
trying to
think so.
assage their own guilt?
No, personally, I don't think there's anything political about that part. I think it's purely a structural and commercial choice where the film is already 2 hours, so what you're going to add half an hour to show it, and also partly I think there's as I said, a commercial concern that people are able to withstand a certain amount of.
That's what I'm trying to say, a
yeah.
commercial concern rather than showing the actual.
Partially, yes.
To me, that wasn't Auschwitz at all.
No, I understand that. Yeah, sure. It was. Well, I mean, I think it wasn't anyway to anyone, and we know that. I mean, we know that Auschwitz cannot be represented. I think in fairness, they don't try and represent. That's why they don't film if this is a man. They film the Truce because they think, well, at least we don't have to cross the boundary of the camp. But yes, I absolutely take your point. That there are, that it doesn't look like. And I mean, that speaks to one of the things that historians are quite interested in film for is the reach, and the fact that it can bring historical knowledge to many more people than we can reach with our books. But if the knowledge is wrong, then that becomes a problem instead of being.
But there were people who were dressed, which was unknown to us. So what sort of impression do people have when they look at this film? It's completely distorted.
They have what they can bear. But you're right. I know you're right. Yes.
If I remember correctly, Spielberg said the same thing after Shirley when he did
Schindler's
Schindler's List. He said he can't show the accurate picture because people who don't know about the Holocaust, when they watch the movie, we just not believe it. It's too horrible. And so he chose on purpose not to show scenes that are too horrible for the average Joe Blogg in America to see. Because he thought that even if he may give some, even if he just convinced them of 10% of what happened, that will be a lot. And if he tries to show even 50%, people will just not believe. It's the same feeling I think that maybe some people had when I was watching 9/11 on TV, and I had to pinch myself. This is not a movie because it just, I think that Spielberg said he was doing it on purpose.
What, you can't face the truth?
Yeah. Can't face the whole truth all of a sudden, so you're going to face a little tiny bit rather than nothing.
It's not only that we don't face the truth, we can't even imagine what it was like. And that is, that I can understand. That we're all sitting here.
Yes, of course.
And
Yeah. Well, we can.
possibly understand what it was like.
That's right. It was
No, I just wanted to comment to what the whole idea of the documentation is obviously a big thing in documenting the Holocaust. And if you remember, I don't know, there was an amazing documentary about Leonard Bernstein, a chap called Leonard, I think Bernstein, from the British Archive unit that actually filmed the whole thing in Bergen-Belsen and gave it to Hitchcock because he was afraid that actually people would not believe what happened in Bergen-Belsen. Because the enormity of what happened was just, how do we say, out of this world? We can't say out of this world.
Yeah, that's right.
So he said, and that, by the way, the whole documentation waited years and years until it was released because they were actually absolutely sure that people won't believe it, He was actually obsessed with, documenting every detail that they saw there. That special archive unit. No, it's just a comment.
Yeah. I mean, you're putting your finger on a debate that's going on since the 27th of January 1945. So, on the one hand, we can't capture exactly what it was like. So does that mean we shouldn't try, or we shouldn't talk about it because maybe because we weren't there? And in which case, is it better to have more people have a partial knowledge than nobody have any knowledge at all? And so these are huge, I would like to sort of metaphysical arguments, really, about representation and the relationship between reality and the image, which I think we'll never come to the bottom of, really.
Couldn't they once make a film which was, I can tell them exactly what it was like. The way we were sitting on the floor in rags, because we were not allowed into where we slept. And at night we slept like this, on the floor. There were no bunks.
They can't make a film like this because the moment they take a gorgeous 25-year-old Italian actor with a brooding look and tell him, right, now we're going to give you a diet, so you weigh 50 pounds, and then we'll put you in rags. The moment they do that, what they're showing you is not what it was like. It's a representation of what it was like. I usually use the image of René Magritte's pipe. You know the painting? Beautiful painting of a pipe with underneath written "Ceci n'est pas un pipe." This isn't a pipe. This isn't a pipe because it's not. It looks like it, but it isn't. It's a representation thereof. So I don't think they can make a film like this. I don't think they ought to, frankly. I think when they try, they fall flat on their faces. There are films that have tried to be hyper-realistic about
Because
it.
people can't imagine.
And because it can't be done. Partly because of that, and partly because of the limitations of the medium.
And because I thought that what I've read of Primo Levi, he wrote about the Holocaust in an fairly understated kind of way. He himself didn't really dwell on and so very graphic. I mean, I mainly remember the periodic table, not the other ones, but also he didn't really go too much on about his own Jewish identity. He was a universalist.
Well,
So
yeah, I would say yes and no. It's true he didn't go on about it. And it's true, as the argument's been made many times, not least in the debate around Bellini's Life is Beautiful, that it's true that Italian Jews in the 30s were highly integrated, and it's true that Levi says what it is to be a Jew I learned in Auschwitz. But as I said, sometimes you can be accurate and simultaneously inaccurate. I mean, to take that sentence and extrapolate it from the context of everything that Levi says. Levi also says, I won't forgive for the sake of forgiveness. I'm not a Christian, I don't turn the other cheek. And yet, I think the film glosses over that. And at the same time, he might not have been devout, and he might not have dwelt on the fact that he was Jewish, but he definitely was. And somebody who writes a poem like that, calls it Shema, I don't think we need to search any further. Notwithstanding the fact that what it is to be Jewish is one of these wonderful philosophical questions that nobody's got an answer to. Yes. Yes.
I just wanted to ask if the scene in the market when he's trying to sell the shirt and he says, translate, that I'm a Jew and I was in Auschwitz because I'm a Jew, is that in the book?
Yes, I think it is.
That's huge. I mean, for me, that scene, I don't need to see anything else in terms of his Jewishness, whether he was integrated or not. And my father was also in Italy, when the war started. And also, it was the anti-Jewish laws that suddenly make you realize, oh yes, I'm a Jew.
Sure.
But yeah, that's a huge.
I think, yes, I mean, I wouldn't say it's huge, but it's something. But in the context of I know what you mean. There's another moment that's pretty huge, which is when the thief tells him, you were Jews, I was the only one. And that's huge for a number of reasons, not just because he classifies Levi as a Jew, but also, especially for me, from my perspective, because it's one Italian character whom we are allowed to dislike, and that's pretty rare in World War II films that have Italians in it.
This you're saying it in a marketplace is also,
I can cope sort of with the fact that he can't really do Auschwitz in a very realistic looking way. I can sort of cope with it, but some of the one scene with the German kneeling was so phony looking. That really bothered me.
Yeah, and it was
That was absolutely the worst part of the film.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Yes.
And another thing that annoyed me all the way through is that it was in English, with actors who were speaking in a phony Italian accent.
Actually, that's a real Italian accent because they dubbed themselves, which is interesting. But anyway.
I mean, to me, it sounded like they were all Israelis.
Oh, I see. They
why did both say? I mean, sorry.
You're referring to the noise, not necessarily for the look. Not the look.
But why did? Is this a dubbed version, or was the original movie that Rossi made in English?
They filmed, both versions are dubbed. So they made the film.
Two versions.
They made the film, and then they dubbed it twice, once in Italian, once in English, because John Turturro is American, so he can't act in Italian. So they did the same. They did it at the same time, and then the English, which is often the case, and the English version got marketed overseas, and the Italian version got marketed in Italy. But they dubbed themselves, so at the very least, the accent is authentic, if nothing else is. But I would say that one...
Except for John Turturro.
He puts it on, that's true, yes, except for John Turturro. But I'd say one thing, I mean, there is one thing about language that's, notwithstanding the fact that obviously they wouldn't have spoken English, at least it keeps the sense that in Auschwitz and in the aftermath, there were all sorts of languages and that communication was a problem. That at least is because actually one thing that Holocaust films often get wrong is this idea that there's us and them and they speak German and we speak whatever, and that that concept of solidarity is partly hard to achieve even within the us camp because they were all foreign to each other.
And they were speaking French to each other from time to time.
Yeah, there was a bit of...
One thing that was really powerful for me was when the comrades were outside and it was going to start to rain and they wanted to be let in the house, but this idealistic home scene, I don't know how to say it, of these people who were so naive and didn't realize how terrible, what a terrible life the people outside had, and they didn't really welcome them, and like that boundary was so definite.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, and again, that's a sketch. In a sense, it's a set piece that's taken out of the book, and there is a sense of barrier, but also a heartwarming sense that you can cross it, because they do make sense. They do make friends. They manage to trade and so on. And but there's lots of stereotype being used towards all sorts. Going back to the German that you brought up, several of you. Now, obviously, the filmmaker was picked up on this, and his explanation was that on that occasion he departed from the book, but only because he wanted to pay homage to Willy Brandt, who went to Warsaw and knelt in front of the Willy Brandt, the first social democratic chancellor of West Germany, who looked up, who was in charge of the Ostpolitik in the 70s and went to Warsaw and knelt in front of the monument of the Warsaw Ghetto.
But he makes him into a Nazi commandant? Is that what? I mean, where does that?
I know, exactly. So it's this, but this kind of anxiety to close the chapter, to say, right, it was horrible, let's move on. It infuses many of the choices that this film makes, and I mean, I don't want to be morbid. I don't want to keep, necessarily, I think Judaism teaches that there are some things that we mustn't remember all the time, but we also mustn't forget. And probably this is one of those. We can't think about it all the time, but do we really need to sort of put a full stop?
I can put a full stop.
Well,
How can I, whose parents and my own brother was murdered? How can I put
well, you can't, but should we, who don't share that? Probably, I mean, I would argue not.
Well, it's a little bit like that poem and the 3 lines at the end. One simple parallel is the chain letters that you get in email. When they have the curse at the end.
Oh, I see.
If you don't pass them on, you I don't.
I hadn't thought about that, Lee, but yeah, thanks.
One thing, though, about the poem, as I remember in the film, he didn't just leave out the curse, he left out everything.
The women,
about
he left out the women.
And he left out the women.
And that's
there was
another
nothing
thing
about-
altogether.
It was
Yeah,
only about
yeah,
considering,
sure.
is he a man? There was nothing about remembering, there was nothing.
I know.
about this.
I didn't want to sort of stay here until 11:30, but gender is a whole other thing. I mean, you could almost every woman is a prostitute, which is, I mean, it's true that prostitution was everywhere in post-war Europe, and I don't think we can argue with that. But for example, Flora, when you read her in the book, she is a prostitute for the Nazis, and then she's a prostitute again for the Soviets, and anyone will pay. It's a survival mechanism. But she's also a generous woman who takes the bread that she earns that way and shares it with her fellow prisoners. She's also other things. So prostitution might have been everywhere, but it wasn't everything. And again, this is something that, in the name of conventions and the structure that a good Hollywood film needs to have, and this isn't Hollywood, but it's meant to be sold there, it's something that, that I think the film gets vaguely wrong, but that's another story. I was sort of concentrating on identity, but yeah, gender is another story.
Well, it wasn't ranked very high on Rotten Tomatoes.
On Rotten Tomatoes? Oh, yes. Well, that's a good guy. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
No, I don't want
No, we all wrote movies have something.